it's all right, it's on. Yeah, should be fine. Go first. I'll go first.
When you were saying earlier that, you know, with new creations, the producers give you free reign, do you mean sort of like that, to just give you the name of what type of monster they want and you've got total free reign, or does it give you a rough idea that, you know, they want something that would live in the water, or, you know,
Well, that's the big thing that I think has changed. I think our era, it really was as simple as there's a line in a script and off you went. So it needs to look like a sea monster, it needs to look like a demon, blah, blah, blah. These days, you have an entire art department that will spend months doing either digital or traditional concept art, and that all gets fed up the chain to the executive producers and the directors, and it comes back down again. It's a design by committee, whereas I can remember, and you'll talk about this more, no doubt, I remember saying to Stephen, there is a Doctor Who story coming up with a big demon in it. If you have a big demon in your portfolio, when you go in for the meeting with J&T, you'll probably get that gig. So you sculpted a little maquette of the Destroyer in red, I believe.
Actually, it's a kind of, no, it is immature, it's a kind of greyish colour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it put that in the portfolio, and John went, oh, what's this? And it just put the seed in. And so you did design that completely from scratch.
Yes, yeah. Mike's quite right. We did have a little bit of private information, which was great. So naturally, when John had asked us to go in and just talk about creatures and, you know, what thoughts we had and so on. And there was this demon. Susan had done one as well, which was slightly more alien and so on. And I, just because the nature of how things I prefer, I'd done something more traditional. And he, I don't know whether he smelt a rat. He just must have thought, how lucky, look, there's a couple of demons in here and we're having one. And
puff of cigarette.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, like slightly suspicious, I'm sure. But yeah, and then they chose it. They said, I mean, Ben Aronovich says he chose that, and J&T used to say he chose that. It doesn't matter which one. We went ahead and did it, and it was a little bit of luck there. But after, you know, even things like, say, Fifi in the script, I'm not even sure it describes it as looking like that at all. And rather like Mike was saying, I'm not quite sure what I was even thinking. I wasn't even following what was in the script. It was like, oh, you know, what I couldn't work out is how is it supposed to look fearsome enough to frighten those pipey people or whatever, and how is it supposed to be so lovely that this woman wants it on her lap and wants it near her? What are we going to... So I came up with this shape. And I think there was a reference to it looking like a ferret or a rat or something like that. And then there's a vague element of that about it. But, yeah, we were given a huge amount of freedom, which well, as Mike was saying, we wouldn't have now. And so I think we were lucky doing it when we did, really.
Would you say in terms of, when you say design by committee, would you say that is now to the detriment of what comes out, or, you know, that to lose that sort of personal freedom in the design? Do you find that hampers it in the long run?
Not necessarily, but there's kind of more layers of approval to go through now before anything is agreed. And I suppose, yes, maybe that can reduce any kind of spontaneous ideas. It's just different the way the show's made now. It's on a much bigger scale with more production people, more producers, more things that have to be approved before they can be given the green light.
I was thinking the other day, I saw a clip of something, I can't remember where I saw it, probably the internet, where they now, with new Doctor Who monsters, there's a kind of show and tell day a couple of days before it goes to the studio, so at least any issues or worries can be dealt with before it arrives for the recording 2 or 3 days later, which did not happen then. You know, often the first time everybody ever saw the thing was when it because everybody was working to such tight deadlines and all-nighters and stuff like this. You'd turn up at the studio, and sometimes, if you were lucky, you'd hear a kind of positive gasp, and sometimes, if you were unlucky, you'd kind of hear a murmur of, you know, oh, what's that supposed to be? But it is so different, and it was so I don't know, a little bit more raw.
Margot Hayhoe said when the Triffids, I asked her at this very stage about a year ago, I said, what was everyone's reaction when the Triffids came out? Was it terror? And she went, everybody just fell over laughing. You know, until they were filmed, she just said they were hilarious. Nobody took them seriously. Yet they look great.
Well, many of these things really, I get slightly annoyed sometimes when people knock the special effects in Doctor Who, and they say, well, and they focus on one element. But for these things to work, everything has to work with it. It has to be lit well, it has to be performed well, you know, it has to, if you're lucky, it's in a good story, you know, all of these things all come together, and then everybody said, well, what a wonderful thing that was. And rather like you're saying with the Triffids, you know, once you see them, they're absolutely excellent and very original, aren't they, and so on. But it all has to work together, and if you're lucky enough to have a director who actually shoots it well and interestingly, and a lighting department that doesn't use the old rugby league lighting and just, you know, light it ridiculously, you know, a little bit of darkness helps sometimes. That didn't often happen, did it?
I mean, poor old Matt Irving still gets mocked for the Merker in Warriors of the Deep, but Matt's up against two problems. They have a quadruped monster, so effectively a pantomime horse costume. They cast as the operator of said monster a pantomime horse actor from Rent-A-Ghost, or actors from Rent-A-Ghost. He's told, suddenly he gets a phone call going, we've brought the studio forward by 2 weeks. So he has 2 weeks less to build the thing than he had originally anticipated. And the lighting designer turns on every light in the studio. You can't win. You cannot win. There's nothing he could have done in that situation that would have kept anybody happy, other than saying, we're not delivering it, which you can't do. So it's one of the things I keep saying. Nobody ever goes out of their way to deliberately make a bad effect. You are at the result of circumstances, and you do the best you can.
I'm going, George, there, at the back. Yes, I can.
Oh, do you want to buy with that? I'm sending my servant. Probably not George, actually. No, probably not you.
Hello, chaps. Quick question. What's the strangest effect I do, or the dangerous, or the most disappointing?
I don't know. I don't think we ever did anything dangerous, well, as far as I can remember. What were the other two? Dangerous and what?
Disappointing.
Strangest, disappointing. Oh, I think the most I think the most disappointing thing we did these two spinning heads of the first two Doctor Who's for a Dimensions in Time, and do you know what? What I love about Doctor Who is the ambition of it is always up here, but sometimes there's just no, and it was a great idea because everything in that it revolved around the fact that it was 3D. And I think they wanted to represent the first two Doctor Who's, and I think it was Mike, good old Mike, said, look, I've got a good idea. What if we have, Steve can do a portrait of these two, and we'll... And in effect, it felt like a good idea. But I think the mistake, one thing that was our fault was that I think I should have put some collars on them, because at least they would have looked like projections or something, whereas they look like a couple of severed heads whizzing around the thing, because you don't normally see so much of their necks. And I thought perhaps they'd have some effect on them, but I suspect you couldn't, because they want them as clear as possible for the 3D thing to work. So they weren't brilliant, not by a long chalk, but within the context of that episode, they were all right. But I'd say that was the most disappointing. Yeah, sorry about them.
Yeah, I mean, Sooty, the animatronic cat from Survival, was a disappointment. So we're asked to come up with an animatronic of a black cat because they said the real cats couldn't be trained, which was true. You'd open the bag, the cats would come out and they'd be gone. So the animatronic got pressed into service far more often than had been intended. Cats are one of those things that you as a person know exactly what it looks like, what the fur looks like, how they move, how they sit. So anything you get wrong is just suddenly, oh, there's something wrong with that. And it was that moment where we brought it out of the bag on location and half the crew had to go into the next room, round a corner and just laugh until they could come back and look at the puppet without literally tears running down their cheeks. And it's a story I've told. It's one of the gaffers on the show. He felt very sorry for us. He got on very well with the effects crew, and he pulled me to one side. He went, "I see you're going to have some trouble with the cat." He said, "I've spotted that there's a black cat just round the corner. Give me the nod. I'll catch it, gut it, and you can stick your hand up it and use that instead." And it was like, Vic, leave the cat alone. Don't touch any cats. So, so we had to calm him down from that. But again, nobody went into that thinking we will do this badly. It's just one of those things that didn't quite work. And I think if we'd been smart, we should have said to the writer, don't make it a cat. Make it a cat-like alien. And then any slight changes, like if its ears had been longer, or its eyes had glowed, or its tail was weird, or it had an extra, joint in the paw, you would have got away with it the way we did with Fifi, in that it's not a real animal, it's an alien. And therefore, if you go, it didn't quite move the way I expected it to, you could have passed it off. But trying to do a real cat was ambitious.
It's a really difficult thing to achieve, even on a feature film budget. You'd be hard pushed to make that work. So most dangerous, was that one of the questions? That was something that almost happened, didn't quite happen. On Happiness Patrol, I think there was a moment where they wanted to put the Candyman suit with the actor in it down a huge pipe. Do you remember that? Yes. And I was sort of taking people aside going, I don't think that's a very good idea. In the end, they didn't do that. They just used the prop skeleton version that VisFX had made. What were the other two? Strange. Oh, disappointing. Would be something I didn't do, I suppose. When we did the Sontarans for the new series recently, when I was initially asked to do it, we were asked to do the whole lot, the prosthetics as well, which I was really quite keen and excited to do. And then before we'd actually started, just as I'd got like a good prosthetics team ready on board up for doing it, the line producer phoned me and said, you're not going to do the prosthetics, we've got our own makeup people that are going to do them. So that was the most disappointing, because I would have loved to have done the whole thing, and when I was, 12 or something, I actually sculpted a Lynx mask, Sontaran mask, replica myself, so it would have been a lovely thing to actually make the ones for the show.
You maybe can't say it, but I can say it.
Mm-hmm.
I wish you'd done those prosthetics. Because they're, yeah, that's all I'm going to say. The costumes are lovely though. Yeah. No, we're over to the audience. We got another question. Aha! Kenny at the back.
Yeah, just wondered, Robert had some work on mini suits. Just wonder in terms of redesigning monsters, which of the classic monsters would you be most keen to do if you had the chance?
Ooh.
Whether it's sensories, anything like that.
Well, quite a quite fortunate in as much as we did get to do a bit of a redesign of Cybermen, Sontarans and the Sea Devil. I suppose it would be fun to do the Draconians, maybe make them a bit more armoured, but I would imagine we probably wouldn't be asked to do the prosthetics, but that would have been a really nice one to do. Yeah. Anyone else?
I don't know. Personally, not that they would ever have something like Fifi back in it, but I mean, I think now the way of doing something like that would be a combination of a puppet and CGI. I think it's just about believable when it's with Sheila Hancock, who kind of sells it to everybody because of the way she's acting. I think it falls down a bit, literally, when it's trying to walk and go through the pipes, and things like that. So I don't know. I suppose I don't know. I think that people like Robert and so on, they've all done a terrific job of reimagining some of the new stuff. I don't have to be honest, I don't have a burning desire to do a new version of anything. I think it would be lovely to revisit something I'd done before for whatever reason, and just improve it with modern technology and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, much like Rob, I got a chance to update the Daleks, so I've had a crack at, one of the top classic Doctor Who monsters, and do the Emperor. So I feel as though that's a box ticked, so I'm quite happy.
Okay, we've got someone else. Oh, I'm looking at Andalusia. Do you want the microphone with you?
Yeah, so guys, what makes the perfect monster? Like, what ingredients do you have to have the perfect Doctor Who monster?
I think that's almost indefinable. If they work, then they've worked, and if they don't, they don't. Why is the Sea Devil more, well known and better received than the Silurian? Why do we like, Big Monster A, whereas the Garm not necessarily quite well received? It's lightning in a bottle to get it right, I think. And if I knew what the perfect solution to that was, we'd get it right. I think sometimes it's silhouette. I think if you get the silhouette right, certainly that's how I feel about the Daleks. I think the ones we did, we spent a lot of time making sure that the silhouette matched what Ray Cusick had done in '63. And I think one of the reasons that the new Paradigm Daleks aren't as well received is that the silhouette got mucked around with too much. So stray too far from what was there before, and it's not the same monster. And are the Silurians that are in modern Doctor Who remotely like the Silurians from the original series? No. Therefore, was it easier to just go, these are a different monster? But that's decisions made at a much higher level.
For me, I reckon it was what I was kind of alluding to earlier, which is everything working together. So it's a great story. It's all the other things, because there have been some terrific monsters that have, for whatever reason, looked fairly lousy, and there's been some fairly average ones that have been terrific because all the other stuff's working around it. And I think the big challenge is something that it looks good and keeps looking good. We're lucky we get a fair bit of love for the Destroyer, but I think half the reason that works is because he's not really on for very long. He kind of comes on, he's only in a few scenes, and he works all right in those scenes, and then he goes. And who knows, if it had been in all 3 episodes, there would have inevitably been moments where it just doesn't look as good or work as well. So for me, it's everything coming together rather than just and also whoever's playing it. If again, with this Destroyer, the guy playing him was very, very young and quite fit, and so he, like a lot of monsters, they kind of lumber about because everything's so heavy and you can't really move in them. But somebody young, he kind of moved around as if it wasn't any effort, and it feels better for that. So all of those things working together, and I think that's where it starts to work.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole load of factors involved. Certainly the performer is a big part of that. And definitely the way it's filmed. If you think of, like, the alien in the first Alien film, you hardly see it. You're seeing strategic little bits of it, and so it's never fully revealed until right at the end. Same with, say, the Famazi in Leisure Hive. Not that that's a great comparison to Geiger's Alien necessarily, but if you look at the earlier episodes, you're seeing a bit of an eye, a bit of a tail, a bit of a claw, and it's much more effective than when you get the full reveal of the beanbag. So a lot is the way it's shot, the way it's lit. As Mike was saying with the Merca, it was in bright lighting, it's never going to work. If it had been maybe in a dark tunnel scene with a load of smoke, strategically shot, maybe they'd have got away with it. So a lot of different factors.
I'm just going to mention again Kevin Lindsay in the Sontaran stuff. The fact that he does all this business where he sticks his tongue out through the mask and sort of licks the edge of the latex made you think, oh God, this is a revolting creature, not a bloke in a mask. So there's something about going that extra mile with the performance that makes a huge difference.
I think with the first two sometimes, which is Kevin Lindsay, his voice as well is very cool. But I mean, Dan Stock, he gives a performance, and just his voice is more, I don't know, I just find it's that hissing sort of, I don't know, it's just particularly effective, I think. Hey, next question. Oh, we've got a young man at the back. Can you see it?
So, if you could bring back any monster from Old Who, why would you bring it back?
I would bring back the Quarks, because I absolutely adore them. I think they are a quintessential 1960s clunky robot, but there's something about that spiky head and the weird sort of childlike giggling that they get together. I love them. I'd bring them. I used to love them in the TV comic strips when they'd become a major villain against the Doctor, and I think they had a huge amount of potential. And there was one on stage at a convention I did a couple of weeks ago, and it looked great. And I thought, you know what, they'd come back really well.
It's hard, isn't it? Some of the ones I would like to have brought back have already come back. I don't know. As I say, my favourites were the Sea Devils years ago, but it was the old ones. No disrespect to Robert's new version, or to the point that actually it's got the best head. But I always wonder why they dressed them up. I loved the fact that they really looked like they'd been under the sea for a long time, and they just were dressed in fishing net or whatever, and they're very effective. So for me, it would be somehow bringing things like that back, but really retaining some of why they kind of worked in the first place.
I have a theory with the Sea Devils, that the reason they worked... There's something about, I used to go to a beach on Berwick.
Yeah.
And on a winter's day on Berwick, I could imagine the Sea Devils coming out the water, and maybe putting them in a distant time and place, as effective and fun as that is, for a little kiddie, it's that a factor that it could be me on holiday. It could be this. Could come out of the water, and it looks like the cold British beach that I'm freezingly, off in there. And it could be like these things could be coming out. And I think there's a bit of that. It's like the Yetis in the underground. It's that familiar setting really worked.
It does. I suppose with them, they also look. I mean, I suppose often you I don't know how often one would go to the beach. Sometimes you see a dead bird or something on the beach, and they kind of look a bit ratty, and it's a horrible. They old Sea Devils always look. They always reminded me of things like that. They feel like they've been, like they look like they smell awful as well, and they just look brilliantly kind of fishy and underwater and stuff like that. And I was just in my mind. Sometimes it's like when these things are updated, it's almost like some element of the point of them is missed, and they're taken into a slightly different direction. These, I think, are incredibly clever. I mean, the ones in the 80s were very weird in like kind of samurai outfits. I don't know what the thinking was there. But it's kind of, I mean, you know, it's just random, isn't it? But I suppose that's the thing for me. I can imagine when things are updated and you're given the opportunity, you want to put your own stamp on it. I think, to me, it would be wonderful if you could, to bring something back and really try and nail what it was about it that worked so beautifully in the first place. Yetis, you mentioned, they always look very, you know, they're quite real because they look a bit knotted and right, because they were what they were. And I can't imagine if they came back now, they'd probably be, I don't know,
What would Rob do if he brought the Yeti back?
You wouldn't make them all, you know, beautifully brushed and things like that.
Make what? Sorry.
The Yeti, if you brought it
Oh,
back,
the Yeti.
keep it back to
No, but they've got a lovely silhouette, as we were talking about the silhouette. And what I love about the Yeti is it's not an obvious Yeti shape. It's a shape that is unique to a Doctor Who Yeti. But in terms of things I'd bring back, well, first I thought, well, maybe the mutants. And then thinking about it, they were so well realised by Jim Atchison in the first place, there's not that much I would change, except maybe give them a bit of movement in the face, some blinks and that kind of thing. But I think the ones that would be quite fun to update would be the Zarbi, to make it a much more flexible costume, so it's not kind of rigid right through from the head to the tail. I think that would be quite a nice thing to do a reimagining of.
I would reckon that would be like a CGI thing now, but with little thin, because obviously it's got man's legs, hasn't it? But if it had little thin legs and stuff like that.
Yeah, you could use CGI
or maybe a
to
combination.
enhance the costume to make the legs.
Yeah.
Just jumping off from Doctor Who, it's just reminded me, because he's sitting there in the corner of the stage, but Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back is a fantastic puppet by Stuart Freeborn and beautifully puppeteered by Frank Oz. And then all the Star Wars prequels, whether they've done him as a new puppet, and I know the sculptor who did the new puppet, and he's a very, very clever man, but he never captured quite what Stuart Freeborn did. And then the CG version, he turns into Sonic the Hedgehog and bounces all around the screen. And then when they do the films, the new sequels, it's like, why does Yoda look so good in those? And it's because they went back and they dug out the original plaster moulds that Stuart Freeborn had made for Empire, and the guy who did them said, you can see all the discrepancies and asymmetricality that's in the sculpt. And he said, without that, getting that right, it's a different character, it's a different puppet. And only by going back to the original moulds, because his ears go in different directions, and he's, you know, there's something about him, this Albert Einstein, you know, crossed with a pixie, that they got it so right the first time round, and nobody's got it right since. And I think it's a testament to Stuart Freeborn that they actually went, well, the only way we're going to get him right again is to go back to the original moulds.
Have we got another question? Yes, we've got a gentleman down here.
Just a question for Mike. I noticed that you worked on Firestorm. I'm just wondering, is it much different working on an Anderson puppet show compared to live action?
Yes, I mean, a Jerry Anderson style puppet production is something that doesn't happen very often because of the huge problems that come with, you know, having to basically operate a puppet at that height means that your set is elevated. And I know that caused huge grief to the recent Netflix version of The Dark Crystal. It's just, you know, that sort of puppet show hasn't been done for so long. I mean, the Henson organisation obviously are hugely experienced at doing this. But yeah, I mean, Firestorm was an interesting project to do just because everything did have to be elevated. And then you're also trying to you're trying to fight with two things that are pulling in different directions. A Jerry Anderson style puppet show is by its very nature an old-fashioned way of making television. And yet the studio executives want it to be like a modern cartoon series. And arguably you can't make those two things actually meet in the middle to make everybody happy. Either the puppets are going to look slightly grotesque because they've tried to make them too real, or people go, these puppets look too puppety. And the test audiences that were shown Firestorm vary massively between men my age who go, it looks great, it looks like Stingray, and a bunch of 10-year-olds who go, this looks crap, it looks like Stingray. So how do you actually get that to meet in the middle? I do not know.
That was the same, I understand, on the Thing prequel, which gets panned generally. The actual effects work, when you see it, it's on YouTube, the Thing, the remake, not remake, the prequel, the practical effects are amazing. And then these execs, they went to the test audience and they said, oh, it looks too much like an 80s film. I was like, well, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, so they then put horrible CGI on it, and hence everybody didn't like it, so there was nothing like the Thing.
Yeah, and it basically killed that company, Stone Dead. I mean, yes, I mean, amalgamated dynamics don't exist anymore. I mean, it was such a poor experience for them that they gave up, effectively. I think one of them's still going solo, but yeah, I mean, it's soul destroying that something that you've put so much work into, that somebody who doesn't understand fundamentally, if somebody's going to see a film that's a sequel to The Thing, they want to see giant rubber monsters spewing goo. They do not want to see pixels. Now, if you want to go and see Tron, you're expecting pixels, you know, but yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, and as a result, Firestorm is still in development hell.
Okay, have we got anyone else who would like to ask a question? Anybody else? No? No.
Oh, yeah, another one at the back.
Oh, at the back, yeah.
Yeah, we've got about, we're not 10 minutes yet.
You again. So, if you could choose out of all the doctors, who would be your favourite and why?
I know. Well, I'm picking John Pertwee because he's my Doctor Who. You know, we say that, don't we? If you're of the age, I adored him. I was mortified when he died in the programme. But it is funny because, like, 4 weeks later, you just love the new one, don't you? And he was great. So I feel I was lucky because I have two very good ones. But really, it was John Pertwee. I just thought he was kind of effortlessly kind of charming and cool. And do you know what? The funny, this go with me on this. I think he's the only one who ever looks like he's properly working the control panel. I don't know why. Because he loves gadgets and cars and things. He really looks like he's working a piece of machinery. Whereas there are some others, won't mention any names. They just look like they're flicking switches about randomly and gurning at the camera or whatever. But he really looks like he's seriously trying to take off or open a door or so. He's taking it. I like him because he's quite serious and you know, everything that's wonderful about him. He's just terrific for me. So that was an easy one there.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up watching Pertwee and Tom, so, I mean, those are my childhood doctors. But I quite liked having this young, preppy, sort of college boy doctor with Peter Davison at the time that Robert and I had just gone to college, and we did watch the show on our TV in our damp bedsit in Croydon. Although I do remember that we made the mistake of going, our TV broke down just before Colin Baker's first episode went out. So we realised that our local Chinese restaurant had a TV in it showing the football. And we went down and said, if we buy dinner for the two of us, will you change the TV so we can watch the new episode of Doctor Who? And then had to make the entire restaurant sit through the Twin Dilemma Part 1. And we slunk out very embarrassed.
Yes, it really was shameful, yes. I'd just say exactly what Stephen said, really. Pertwee going into Baker and the initial horror of, who is this strange man? And then 2 or 3 weeks later, it's like, yeah, he's the Doctor, that's absolutely fine, yeah.
Anybody? Yes. George, go on, George. Can you raise your voice, George, because my legs are getting tired?
Of course I can.
And I'm only saying that because it's you.
Okay. Easy one. What was your favourite project you've done?
Project? That doesn't have to be Doctor Who, that could be whatever you like.
So I've been very lucky in that I've done an awful lot of different projects over the years, mostly documentary, sort of as opposed to sci-fi, which always surprises people that most of my work is non-genre. And given that we are in a digital age, for me to get a show called The Last Day of the Dinosaurs was fantastic. And once I'd sat down with the producer and with the digital effects team and we'd worked out what the show was going to be, it was a 90-minute Discovery Channel documentary about the asteroid that wiped everyone out. So it's 90% CG. But they said to me, we've got this one sequence where after the asteroid has impacted, this tsunami comes in and hits the coast, takes out a forest, so a prehistoric forest, and kills a herd of triceratops. So I got the lovely job of building this huge 1/6 scale miniature prehistoric forest with puppet triceratops dinosaurs in it, and then it was all built in the tank in the studio floor in the middle of Twickenham Stage 1, and 2 enormous great dump tanks releasing thousands of gallons of water. And there was a point that I'm standing there on the set the day before we did it and thinking, I've just been paid by Discovery Channel to build dinosaurs, make like a Ray Harryhausen, Willis O'Brien style prehistoric landscape in a world where they could have done all this digitally and they still let me play with this. That was brilliant. I'm really chuffed with the end result. It cuts in really nicely. But just to be able to do something like that, where I thought that sort of work would always be in the hands of the digital artists, gave me a huge amount of pleasure doing that.
For me, I think I'm a lucky fellow because my 9 to 5, in inverted commas, job is sculpting portraits, and it's a lovely job. It's a nice thing to do. It gives me the opportunity, if I'm offered something else nice, I can either think, do I fancy that or do I not fancy that? It sounds very grand. It isn't as grand as that, but it's a lovely position to be in. And about 2 or 3 years ago, no, actually it's more, must be 5 years ago now. Interesting you talk about Jerry Anderson stuff. I was involved in a revamping of the original Thunderbirds style on 3 new episodes, which were for the anniversary of Thunderbirds, and which I so enjoyed. I originally I did one head for them, and they're all new characters, which is nice, and but they're in the style of. And I remember taking the head down to the studio, and what they rather cleverly managed to get hold of or install themselves into one of the old Slough buildings where the old series were made, and they had the gantry up, for the puppeteers, and there were lots of models. And I took this head down on a Sunday, and I was just, I feel like I've done a lot of things, and I'm not easily kind of sort of swayed, but I was just so overwhelmed. I just thought, this is amazing. All the puppets were hanging up, the obviously ones I would recognise, and there were models and the little sets and and everybody. It was the day before they started rolling the first sequences, and I was so utterly bowled over by it. I thought, oh God, I could just stay here. And I handed over my sculpture, and the the guy in charge, Stephen Lariviere, said, well, that's great, thanks, Steve. And I said, well, if there's anything else, I was so sort of excited, if there's anything else, you know. Oh, well, unfortunately, we haven't got the money. We've got 2 villains in the last episode, and we don't have the money. We're going to redress a couple of old puppets. And I said, oh, I'll just do them for nothing, like this. Pathetic, really, I know. But I said, oh, no, I'll do them for nothing. But, to his credit, he said, all right, well, look, go away. He said, go away. And I'll phone you on Wednesday. And if you still feel the same, because I know, he said, I can see you're enjoying being here. If you still feel the same, then I'll bite your hand off to do it. And he did phone, and I did still feel the same. And I haven't regretted it, because it's turned into a lot of quite interesting work with them. They specialise entirely on all the stuff that, you know, we were bemoaning a bit earlier. But it's fascinating to watch. And the little bit I have learned with that stuff is that depending on your audience, they will just overlook the strings and the fact that they can't walk properly and all of the things that we know about. If the stories are interesting and if the characters are interesting and all of that. And interestingly, in Japan particularly, there's still a massive thirst for that slightly old-fashioned look and that model work and so on. So I would say, in all honesty, that in recent years anyway, that's been a really exciting and diverting thing that I wouldn't have imagined coming my way. So I'm hugely grateful, really.
I'll go with a non-sci-fi thing. About 10 years ago, I was having a meeting with Kate Bush in her London flat, and she told me that she was going to do some live shows in London, and she wanted me to be involved in the whole creative process of staging them. And so that was a lovely project for me, working on her live shows at Hammersmith, because it was with her and she's fab, and I got to build masks, puppets, there were wings, there were kind of all the kind of things that I do and I like doing, and it was an extraordinary live event, really, that I felt very privileged to be a part of.
That's a good one. Yeah. Now I'm looking at the clock now, so I am going to, at this point, I think I'm going to wind this up, because I think we need to clear the hall. We need to go and collapse over lunch. Dinner. Sorry, dinner. And I just want to take this occasion to thank guests here on stage, Rob, Mike, and Steve. Gosh, my brain is going. Thanks. Thank you. And also, I just want to thank a few more people while we're here. I just want to thank Glenn and Stephen, the other Stephen down here, for coming along as well. And we're